There's a specific kind of stillness a crow has when it's watching you, not the casual glance of a bird moving through its day, not the flicker of an eye toward food or noise. This is different. You feel it before you fully register it. The bird isn't moving. It's positioned somewhere just above your sightline, a fence post, a wire, the bare branch of a tree, and it's locked onto you with an intensity that feels somehow personal. Most people shake it off. They tell themselves it's nothing. It's a bird. But some people can't quite let it go. Because something about that stare, that stillness, that moment of being genuinely seen by a wild animal, stays with them. And often, in the days that follow, something changes. Maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe it's pattern recognition. Or maybe crows know something about us that we haven't fully understood yet. What science has discovered about how crows perceive, remember, and respond to human beings is, without exaggeration, one of the more unsettling findings in modern animal cognition research. And by the end of this video, you may never look at a crow the same way again. If you've ever found yourself genuinely curious about what animals know and what they might be trying to communicate, you're exactly the kind of person this channel is built for. Welcome. And if this is your first time here, stay close. The rabbit hole goes deep. Before we get into what researchers have found, let's establish something about crow behavior that most people have never been told. When a crow stares at you, there are actually several distinct types of stare, and they don't all mean the same thing. There's the observational stare, where a crow is simply cataloging you, filing you away. Crows do this constantly with humans they don't recognize, and there's hard science behind why. Researchers at the University of Washington conducted a series of landmark experiments beginning in the early 2000s under the direction of Professor John Marsluff. In these studies, researchers wore distinctive masks, a caveman mask, a Dick Cheney mask, while trapping and banding crows on the university campus. Just that one interaction. Capture and release. What happened afterward was remarkable. For years, sometimes more than a decade, crows on that campus would respond with alarm calls, dive-bombing behavior, and persistent aggression specifically toward people wearing those masks, even as the overall crow population turned over and new generations were born. The offspring, who had never been near the original trapping, learned to identify the dangerous face from their parents. They were taught socially who not to trust. Now consider what this means for that stare. When a crow fixes its gaze on you with that locked, intense focus, it may be doing something far more deliberate than random observation. It may be memorizing you, encoding your face, your posture, your movement pattern into a memory system that, according to Marsluff's research, can persist for over a decade. You're being filed. And what you do in the next few moments will determine what file you end up in. Now here's where it gets more complicated and more interesting. Crows don't just remember threats. They also remember kindness. They remember neutral strangers, and they respond to each category with striking specificity over time. There are hundreds of documented cases, not folklore, but observed, repeated, reported interactions of crows leaving objects for people who fed them regularly. Small items, pieces of glass, buttons, a broken earring, a shiny bottle cap. In Seattle, a young girl named Gabby Mann began feeding crows in her yard as a child and started receiving gifts in return, items carefully left in her feeding tray when it was empty. The story was reported widely and investigated, including by researchers familiar with Marsluff's work. What's significant isn't just the gift giving, it's the reciprocity. The crow understood that a specific human in a specific location had done something beneficial, and the crow returned to that location and left something in exchange. This is not instinct. Instinct doesn't leave broken earrings in bird feeders. This is a form of social behavior that implies recognition, memory, intentionality, and something that functions like gratitude, even if it isn't identical to the human experience of that emotion. So when a crow stares at you with that particular focused stillness, it may not be warning you at all, in the traditional sense of danger. It may be evaluating you, deciding which category to put you in, choosing whether you will become a threat to remember, a stranger to ignore, or something rarer, a human worth returning to. And the stare itself, the unbroken intensity of it, is part of that evaluation process. But there is another kind of stare, and this one is harder to explain away. People who study crows in the field, and people who live in proximity to crow populations over long periods of time, describe a distinct behavioral shift that happens in crows right before something disruptive occurs in their environment. A shift in weather systems, a predator moving through a territory they haven't identified yet, a change in the pattern of human activity nearby. The stare in these moments is described differently, less evaluative, more urgent. Ornithologists have documented that crows have a sophisticated alarm communication system that operates in layers. John Marsluff and others have described crow vocalizations as context-specific, different calls for aerial predators versus ground predators, for known threats versus novel ones. Crows also go silent in ways that carry information. A suddenly quiet crow, positioned and staring, can indicate that something nearby has the crow's full attention, something it hasn't categorized yet, something it's unsure about. For other animals in the ecosystem, a staring, silent crow is itself a signal. For humans standing nearby, it often registers as a feeling more than a thought. Something is off. Something has changed. The crow isn't reacting to you. It's reacting to something near you, or something coming toward where you are. This is not mysticism. This is environmental awareness operating at a frequency most humans have largely stopped using. Crows are in constant sensory communication with their landscape in a way that our species mostly disconnected from when we moved indoors, started staring at screens, and stopped needing to read the forest to survive. The feeling that a crow is warning you may, in many cases, be accurate, not because crows have supernatural knowledge, but because they're paying attention to things you stopped paying attention to centuries ago. There's another category of crow behavior that people describe with even more emotional weight, and it connects to one of the most profound areas of animal cognition research: grief. Crows hold funerals. This is not a poetic metaphor. Researchers, including Kaylee Swift, a scientist who completed her doctoral work on crow responses to death at the University of Washington, have documented a specific behavioral ritual. When a crow dies, other crows in the area will often gather around the body. They become agitated, they call loudly, and then many of them go silent. Swift's research demonstrated that crows use these gatherings, in part, as information collection events. They're learning about what killed the individual. They're identifying potential threats. But what makes the behavior so striking to observe is how much it resembles mourning, the gathering, the silence, the extended time spent near the dead. Whether crows experience something like grief in a subjective sense remains scientifically unresolved. What's clear is that their behavior around death is complex, intentional, and socially transmitted in ways that go far beyond what instinct alone can account for. People who have witnessed crow funerals describe them as deeply affecting, even people who don't normally feel much connection to birds. There's something about a large group of wild animals going quiet together around a death that resonates somewhere very old in human biology, and this connects back to the stare, in an unexpected way. When someone is in a period of grief or significant personal loss, they sometimes report crow encounters that feel different from ordinary wildlife observation. A crow that doesn't fly away, a crow that seems to hold eye contact for an unusually long time, a crow that keeps reappearing over several days. Some researchers who study human-animal interaction suggest this may have a partial explanation in crow behavior itself. Crows respond to changes in human demeanor, posture, and vocal patterns. A grieving person moves differently, sounds different, makes less assertive eye contact, spends more time still and alone outdoors. All of these behavioral shifts are legible to an animal as acutely perceptive as a crow. The crow's response to a grieving human may not be supernatural. It may simply be that crows, having navigated their own relationship with death, recognize something in ours. And maybe that's why those encounters feel so weighted. Because two species, both of whom have evolved to live with loss, are briefly, quietly, acknowledging each other. There's one more layer to this that almost never gets talked about. And it may be the thing that most changes how you see these moments. Crows can recognize themselves in mirrors. This places them in a very small category of animals, alongside great apes, elephants, bottlenose dolphins, and a handful of others that have passed the mirror self-recognition test, which is used as one of the scientific benchmarks for self-awareness. Think about what that means. The crow that stares at you knows that it is the one staring. It isn't confusing its reflection for another bird, isn't responding to your gaze as a simple reflex. There is, in some functional sense, a self behind those eyes. A self that is making a choice about where to direct its attention, how long to hold it, and what to do with what it learns. You are not being watched by an automaton. You are being watched by a mind. And the question that lingers, the one that science can describe but hasn't fully resolved, is what that mind is thinking while it watches. Is it cataloging a threat? Evaluating a potential ally? Responding to something in the environment you haven't noticed? Reflecting, in some manner we don't have full access to, on the proximity of another being? It may be all of these simultaneously. It may shift from one to the other in the span of seconds. What's extraordinary is that the crow is doing this in a brain roughly the size of a walnut. The neural architecture of corvids, crows, ravens, and their relatives, achieves a density and organizational sophistication that neuroscientists are still working to fully map. The structures responsible for higher cognition in corvid brains are organized differently than in mammals, but the outputs, the behaviors, the problem-solving, the memory, the social complexity, are in many domains comparable to those of much larger-brained animals. The crow staring at you from that fence post is running cognitive processes that, until recently, we assumed were unique to animals with much larger, more complex brains. It's running you through those processes, analyzing, remembering, deciding. That feeling of being truly seen, unsettling, intimate, impossible to fully dismiss. The science suggests you may not be imagining it. So what do you do with all of this? The honest answer is that most of us don't need to do anything with it. Crows are wild animals living their own complex lives, and the vast majority of the time their behavior has nothing specifically to do with us. But there are moments, and if you spend enough time outdoors, you'll have at least one, where the encounter feels different, where the stillness is particular, where the eye contact holds for just a beat too long, and you find yourself slightly altered by it. In those moments, the most scientifically accurate response, and the most psychologically resonant response, may be the same one. Pay attention. The crow is paying attention. It has in all likelihood been paying attention to your corner of the world far longer and with far more acuity than you have. If it's staring with unusual focus, something in its environment, possibly your environment too, has warranted that focus. Not always danger, not always a message, but something worth noticing. And the people who carry crow encounters with them, who replay them, who find themselves thinking about a particular bird years later, maybe what they're actually remembering is the rare disorienting experience of feeling fully observed by something that owed them nothing and chose to look anyway. That's not nothing. In a world where most things rush past without a glance, being seen, really seen by a wild mind, has a weight to it that's hard to put down. If you've had an encounter like this, a crow, or any animal that made you stop in a way you couldn't quite explain, the comments are exactly the right place for that. Some of the most unexpectedly powerful stories come from ordinary moments that most people never think to share. I'll be reading, and maybe animals notice more than we realize. I'll see you in the next one.